This week, we will be learning Parshat Achrei. Normally, Achrei is separated from is together with Kedoshim. But of course, because this is a leap year, once again, we find these two Parshiot separated. And the benefit of that is that we can give a shir, as are many, many people, I'm sure, giving shiurim both on Achrei and Kedoshim. So this evening, we will do the same. Another point that I'd like to make concerning this particular recording is that this evening, as I record, Congregation Kins is having a very special, very meaningful Yom HaShoah program, and it's at 8 o'clock. So therefore, this is going to be a recorded message that you can access at any time. First of all, we'll begin by talking about the structure of Parshat Achrei. It begins, first of all, with recalling perhaps the most traumatic event of Jewish life at that time, and that clearly was the death of Nadav and Avihu. Once again, one of at least 4 times in Tanakh, the Torah mentions either directly or indirectly the death of these two Kohanim among the first Kohen family, Achrei Mot, Shnei Bnei Aaron, and that after they died, bringing an unauthorized program or korban on the Mizbeach. We talked about this when we learned about it in Shmini, but it is interesting that the Torah sees this as a central event in Jewish life. Korban is not the time for creativity. Korban is the time for subservience, complete subservience to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are no creative korban givers. There are only people who follow, both Kohanim and the rest of Klal Yisrael, who follow the statutes that apply to the korban. That's one of the 2 elements of being a Jew. One is complete subservience, recognizing that what I want to do is not necessarily what should be done. Therefore, I follow the commands of the Torah. There is a commander, and we follow those laws. But of course, there is a time for great creativity as well. And certainly, when it comes to Libra Torah, we have so many, thousands upon thousands of great Gedolei Yisrael who offer their thoughts on Tanakh, on Talmud, on various other aspects of our intellectual life. That's where creativity comes in. Now, the very first opening here, right after Nadav and Avihu, we have the regulations of Yom Kippur. The Kohen bringing the sacrifice through his own subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the very, very carefully orchestrated ritual which comes with it on Yom Kippur. Actually, all at the very beginning of Masechet Yoma deals with the preparations of the Kohen and what he had to do to make sure that he, along with the people who surrounded him, performed the mitzvot of Yom Kippur exactly, kechut hasara, exactly the way they should be. But then, after we have the mitzvah of the bringing of the korbanot hayom, the sa'ir lazazel, and all of the detail that goes with it, we move right into something which is much more mundane. Yom Kippur is the spirit. Yom Kippur, we deal with the spirit of the Jew. We don't eat. But immediately after that, what do we find? Halachot that regulate the two of the most essential elements of human growth and human life. That is, the regulations over food and eating and the regulations over sexual activity. Now, the Rambam actually, when he wrote his famous Yad HaChazakah, he gave names or titles to each section. And the section that he calls Kedusha is not the section that has tefillin in it, Hilchot Tefillin, or even Yom HaKippurim. It has the regulations of food, Hilchot Ma'achalot Asurim, and the regulations of sexual activity, of the Kedusha, of Hilchot Bia, and how we are to conduct ourselves as Jews. So we move from the spiritual realm, which is commanded by God, and we take it and we move it from the spiritual realm to the mundane realm of food and sexual activity. Now, the Torah introduces the parsha of Arayot, the parsha of illicit sexual partners and behaviors, Perek Yud Chet, the 18th chapter, and in it, Perek Yud Chet Pasuk Aleph, from the very beginning. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. Hashem spoke to Moshe that he should convey what he's about to say to the people. Daber el bnei Yisrael ve'omarta alehem. Speak to them and say, Ani Hashem Elokechem. Now, this concept of Ani Hashem Elokechem, we find, of course, a parallel to it in the Aseret Divrot. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzeiticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. That I am the Lord your God, who has commanded you and took you out of Mitzrayim. So let's see what Rashi says here on this unusual, shall we say, insertion of Ani Hashem Elokechem. It's not at every mitzvah, not at all. But this entire block of regulations, which in fact regulate our sexual lives, Hashem gives a preamble. Ani Hashem Elokechem. So let us look and see what Rashi says. Rashi says, Ani hu sha'amarti b'Sinai anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the same God who told you before in Parshat Yitro that I am the Lord your God. V'kibaltem aleichem malchuti. And you accepted upon yourselves then malchuti, my kingship. That you accept. Me'ata, says Rashi in the name of Hashem, kabalu gezerotai. Now that you have accepted my authority, my regal authority, malchuti, now these are to say, now you're going to accept my gzerot. Okay, and that is the essence of Rashi, and actually he really takes it from the Medrash, which says a similar thing, that it's one thing to accept authority in general, it's another thing to accept probably the ramifications of that authority when we do what the authority asks us to do. So that is what Rashi says here. Now, the Torah tells us in Pasuk Gimel and Pasuk Gimel, K'maasei Eretz Mitzrayim asher yishavtem ba, as the deeds of the land of Mitzrayim, or the activity, the acts of Mitzrayim in which you have dwelt, lo ta'asu, you should not engage in such behavior. Of course, the question is, you're not there anymore. We'll get to it. Uchmaasei Eretz Canaan, okay, and in the activity or the actions of the people of Canaan, asher ani mevi etchem shama, that I bring you there, lo tasu, you shall not do, uvchukotehem lo telechem, and in their in their statutes or in their ordinances, you shall not follow, shall not do them. Now, this pasuk itself prompts many questions. First of all, we do have two verbs indicating the two different cultures. One is K'maasei Eretz Mitzrayim, and we're not to act in that way. And also K'maasei Eretz Canaan, and nor shall we engage in activities as they do in Eretz Canaan. And then the Torah tells us, Uvchukotehem lo telechu, in their ordinances, that's probably the best word, their ordinances, lo telechu, you may not go. Now, some Meforshim say there's a difference between maaseh and telech and halacha. Maaseh is an action that people can do undoubtedly on impulse. On impulse. They see an attractive person and they think thoughts they shouldn't be thinking, and maybe then those thoughts lead to behaviors that they shouldn't be doing. But there is, and that is what we say, k'maaseh, the actions of human beings. Being human means that they're going to make mistakes, moral mistakes, other mistakes, and sometimes we are drawn to situations that we could and must avoid, but we don't always do it. On the other hand, the phrase "uvchukotehem lo telechu," you may not go in their according to their ordinances. Telechu, we see here, is means to say a certain legislation or a certain ongoing cultural norm. You shall not engage in their norms, not impulse, but even, and as you say, it's all around you, so you do it too. That's different from having their norms becoming our norms. And that's uvechukotehem lo telechu. And as you know, there are various different interpretations, halachic interpretations, about how far that goes. Now, we know that Rashi tells us, uvechukotehem lo telechu. He also, once again, quotes the Medrash, Mahi niach hakatuv shelo amar, ela elu nimusim shalahem. What is it that's left unsaid by the phrase, or unclear? Do not go according to their ordinances. These are their rules of etiquette. We're not talking about where you put the fork and the knife. I don't think I can't imagine there's anybody who would find that to be unacceptable. But we are talking about the way they conduct themselves on life cycle events, the way they conduct themselves on daily activities of joy and mourning. It's those things which have become, shall we say, quasi demanded of the people. It's like a quasi law, that there are ways that they do things. For some people, it's eating turkey on Thanksgiving. Now, there are those who ban it, and there are those who say that doesn't come under the rule of uvechukotehem lo telechu. But one thing is, we do have certain procedures, certain behaviors that are considered somewhat normative in the American society. So those things we have to try to avoid. Now, Rashi goes on and he answers, what are the things that we should avoid? Devarim achakukim lahem kagon teatriot nitztadiot. Theaters, teatronim, theaters, going to theater for the culture, and going to large stadiums. Now, again, that will be subject to different views. That Rashi says there are certain things that have become cultural norms, whether it was in France in the 12th century or the 10th, 11th century, or whether it is in the United States here. There are certain elements that are. Rashi says, indeed, he quotes the Medrash, that we should stay away from those places. That's what he says. That's Rashi. Now, one of the things that we need to think about here is something that Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik mentioned. Why he asks, why does it pick Mitzrayim and Eretz Canaan? The Torah very seldom tells us about any other country what they do. But he says as follows: Egypt was the most urbanized and technologically advanced civilization of its time. That seems to be commonly accepted. While Canaan was pastoral and primitive. We're going to see that that's not a universally accepted idea. But Rabbi Yoshe felt if you look at the two of them, Egypt is advanced and Canaan is primitive, and Rabbi Yoshe uses the term primitive. The Torah emphasizes here that as different as they are from each other, neither of these fundamentally immoral societies should serve as role models. Now, it is interesting that Nechama Leibovitz, alei shalom, actually makes a similar statement, but she says as follows, okay, that when we talk about Eretz Mitzrayim, which we lived in, Eretz and Eretz Canaan, to which God will be taking us, Yikablu Yotzei HaMidbar in Birchot HaCivilizatzia Gam Et HaShifat B'nei HaMakom. It says as follows, Nechama said, that there's two elements to a society in which we live. There is the ethical, moral views, and there is also then the way people conduct themselves in general. So she mentions here that, first of all, that Mitzrayim was indeed a technologically advanced society, and Canaan was a pastoral society. It was one in which they had reached a very sophisticated way of living. So you have a difference between the Nechama Leibovitz and Rabbi Yoshe ber Soloveitchik, Zichronam Livracha, in that how they look at Egypt, which both of them agree was the most advanced society of its time, and the Torah warns us about that, even though they've left. Talk about that, and then the Eretz Canaan, which according to Rabbi Yoshe ber was a primitive society, but nevertheless primitive societies can be attractive too. Why? Because we're talking about, in this Perek Yud Chet, we're talking about sexual mores and sexual norms. And in primitive societies, advanced societies, it exists everywhere. On the other hand, Nechama Leibovitz says that even in the land of Canaan, people can be seduced into believing that this is an advanced society. It is, and look how sophisticated it is, and therefore I shall follow their norms. Now, what is really very interesting in this statement of the Torah in Pasuk Gimel is the use of a subordinate clause. Subordinate clause is one which is not the main part of the sentence, but it supplies a certain support. Watch what it says. Pasuk Gimel, K'maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim, as the activity in Mitzrayim, Asher Yeshavtem Ba, which you dwelled in. Seems to be superfluous. This is a subordinate clause, which you lived in. The pasuk was complete, pretty much. K'maaseh Eretz Mitzrayim Lo Tasu. What is Asher Yeshavtem Ba? It's a subordinate or a dependent clause. It's also K'maaseh Eretz Canaan. Once again. And the way of the activities in the land of Canaan, Asher ani mevi etchem shama. Again, a subordinate dependent clause that is almost like a parenthesis. Lo tasu. The main part of the pasuk is don't act like the Egyptians. Don't act like the Canaanites. So, what is the idea of the two subordinate clauses? Now. One, it would appear that, as we said before, that you dwelled in this particular place in Eretz Mitzrayim, and so therefore a lot of it is probably rubbed off on you. Now, I think that these two clauses, these two dependent clauses that the Torah places there are very important. And that's because they reflect a human condition that is a part of human nature. We were in Mitzrayim. It was horrific. It was terrible. But even when Hashem told Avram Avinu to leave, for example, many years before that, to leave Lech lecha me'artzcha miuladotcha mibeit avicha, to leave Ur Kasdim, It was a test. Why was it a test? It was a terrible place. The answer is human beings settle. Sadly, of course, this evening we of course again mention and mourn the Shoah. Many Jews hesitated, sometimes more often than not, too long before leaving Germany. Well, why? It's not that this is, God forbid, not an indictment of what they did. It's part of human nature. People don't want to leave their home. They remember things that are good. And that's why the Torah tells us, it is very, very common for people to look back and think about the good old days, even though the good old days weren't so good. I remember what we ate in Mitzrayim, they said. Take us back. Didn't we tell you that we'd rather serve in Mitzrayim than die in the Midbar? They said that to Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Torah says, Asher Yishavtem Ba. That's one flaw that we have as human beings. We look back with a, shall we say, a joyful eye at what was there, even though it wasn't. And then, Uchamase Eretz Canaan, Asher Ani Mevi Etchem Shama, that dependent clause, which I'm going to bring you to. What's the point of that? What is the point of that? And that is that the grass is always greener on the other side. And so therefore Hashem says, you're going to be coming into new lands, and you are going to see new lands that have new norms, and you're going to remember the old land, which had its norms. It was sophisticated. It was in many ways probably beautiful. The architecture was beautiful. The technology was magnificent. And you're going to be coming into Eretz Canaan, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you're going to see houses, beautiful houses that you did not build. Somebody else built them. It is an advanced society that would seem to support somewhat what Nechama Leibovitz viewed it. But in either case, our tendencies are either to look back at what once was with a positive eye, or to look always to yearn for what we hope we will have. And so therefore, that should be, the Torah tells us, don't fall into that trap in either case. Now, what about America? As a matter of fact, when we talk about theaters and we talk about stadiums, football, baseball, all kinds, soccer, all kinds of stadiums. Now, again, certainly this is not to say that there's a blanket issue for that, not at all. But and not only is there not a blanket issue, if there were one, I would not be the one to dare to give these isurim. However, I'd like to talk a little bit about us in America. There is within us, we in America, number one, are in the land of great technology, great advancement. We're going through difficult times now. There's no question. Economically, we're going through difficult times. So, in terms of our society and sociological interaction between people has not been this tension-filled for decades, as much as I can live, as much as I can remember, at least since 1968, when of course, during the Vietnam War. But there is a lot of distrust, mistrust, even hate. Now, but nevertheless, there's much that is attractive, beautiful in America, and much of it is what we would call normative. That's right. Our system of justice is flawed, but there is no system of justice that man has ever made that is a greater attempt at justice than this particular country. So where do the dangers lie here? It is, I would submit, it is that of assimilation. Jews are very, very good at avoiding unpleasant locations, even if they're in them, so they don't interact. Whether it was in Europe, there's relatively little interaction between the Jews of the ghetto. That was oftentimes imposed upon the Jews, but it was also accepted by the Jews. And so therefore, there are many trials and tribulations in Europe, but it wasn't it wasn't necessarily assimilation until the 19th century. Here in America, we know that there are two streams that are going simultaneously. And the question again is, going according to our American norms. We're going in two directions. On the one hand, there is a powerful draw through these wonderful queue of agencies that we have. On the flight home from the East Coast for Pesach, I had the joy of interacting with the head of NCSY for Chicago. And their whole life is the organization's life, the family's life, the members' life, is that of bringing people, Jewish people, especially teenagers, closer to Aviyam Shabbat Shamayim. But, and by the way, NCSY is one such agency, whether it's B'nai Akiva or other wonderful agencies that provide our youth with the joy of being Jewish. But we also know that the trend the other way toward intermarriage, toward leaving the faith altogether, or being non-affiliated Jews is equally powerful. So there's two types of assimilation, I would submit to you. One is what we call, one of course is, it is I would call it a pernicious assimilation. Pernicious means it's harmful. The people who assimilate if they go to a baseball game on Shabbos, so that is pernicious. Why? Because they're throwing away a piece of the Torah in order to get into this engagement in and of itself. But benign assimilation is going to a baseball game, going to a concert, going to any number of activities that make our society pleasant and good. Now, that when we engage in those, whether it's to a ball game or whether it's to a concert or whether it's to a movie or other such things, depending on the type of movie, of course, then that is what we would call benign assimilation. The non-Jewish world does it. We do it. We sacrifice no Torah. I can bring in baseball parks. They have kosher food there. Even yeshivot or camps bring their children to such games. It's assimilation, but it's benign. We sacrifice nothing of our Jewish life in order to engage in that. On the other hand, in America, there's far, far more dangerous and more powerful is pernicious assimilation. That means we go to the ball game and we go on Shabbos. We go to the ball game and we buy the hot dog instead of the non-kosher hot dog instead of the kosher hot dog, or we don't bring our own food. And that in itself, of course, tears at the core of the Jewish people. The medrash that says and that Rashi brings that we should not go to theatronim, we shouldn't go to theaters, and we shouldn't go to places like stadiums, etc. That would seem, unless the content is negative, that would seem to be a form of benign assimilation. And so therefore, why would the Torah tell us, according to this medrash, don't go there? The problem is not in the content of an individual event. The problem is, or the content then is, the accumulation of such events. If one goes to a sporting event, to an activity, one goes to a concert, one goes to any number of very nice social events. It's benign assimilation, but even benign assimilation can develop a certain pernicious attitude if that's all we experience. If the joy is expressed only in the television show or in the theater or in the sporting event or in fashion or in any of the other draws that we have in our American culture, that in itself, the cumulative effect of those things can actually do damage. And that seems to be what the Medrash is telling us. Remember, don't adopt the norms of the community in place of Jewish norms. If it's beside them, perhaps yes. But if it's in place of them, then even the most benign of assimilation, if it is compounded over and over again, it in itself can become a destructive force within the Jewish community. So therefore, I think one of the major lessons that we can take from this parsha is this segment of Perek Yud is aside, and certainly once we get into the sexual mores, which in America, as you know, sex is literally casual, literally casual. The Torah tells us no. Such a sublime human event, such a sublime human relationship can and should never be seen as casual. It is always an attempt to bring each other closer in a halachic way, and the two of the people and their family become closer to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Okay, everyone. So I want to wish everybody a meaningful Yom HaShoah. If you're seeing this after Yom HaShoah, of course, in the next week or so, we will be both observing Yom HaZikaron, and then which is a day of solemnity, and we hope that it will be the last Yom HaZikaron that we will have. Maybe there will be peace, even then there'll probably be a Yom HaZikaron, but a different tenor. But we have to daven and pray and hope that that and next Yom HaAtzmaut will be one filled with joy. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.